morning, Rian Kutsia, Fortis Proactive Defense Solutions. I'm back talking to Damian Enslin from SAGA. Many people know SAGA, South African Gunowners Association. These guys are doing good work as far as our firearms rights are concerned. Damian, welcome back and thank you once again for your time.
Rian, thank you very much again for the opportunity and a pleasure to be back on your channel. Much appreciated.
Awesome. So today, we're going to be talking about the Firearms Control Act and those amendments. And I don't know, I was actually a little bit shocked when I saw your press release on that. But before we get to that, let's first talk about something else that's been really making the whole internet and the media buzz. And that's the fact that a very well-known South African politician, for people who are not from South Africa, by the name of Julius Malema, the leader of a political party called the EFF, Economic Freedom Fighters, has now been found guilty in a court of law for the handling of a firearm and firing of a shot in a public place. It took a long time to get here. Damian, tell us more about this and the intricacies of how they got here and what your opinions are on this.
Yeah. So, I'm not going to deal with any political issues. I'm a lawyer, a trained lawyer, so we look at facts and circumstances. So what happened is not alleged anymore. He's now been convicted, obviously, of these crimes. He's in July 2018 at an EFF rally at a stadium, a rifle, a semi-automatic rifle, either was handed to him or he took. Accused number 2 was not convicted. Mr. Stamen was not convicted of a crime of handing off a firearm to someone who shouldn't have been in possession of it. So accused number 1, which is Julius Malema, took the semi-automatic rifle, and there are various video clips surfacing on the internet that shows exactly what happened, and he fired a number of shots over the rally, the crowd, and we're talking about thousands, if not 10,000 of people in that stadium. So that's a highly risky maneuver to do, a highly risky thing to do. Take a semi-automatic rifle and fire it over the heads of a number of people. And what happened as a result of that, and again, I'm not going to go into why it took so long for him to be brought to trial, and there were various entities involved in making sure that it came to trial, but eventually a trial was had. He was charged with, as you correctly said, the unlawful possession of a firearm, unlawful possession of ammunition, discharging of a firearm in a public place, built-up area, as well as reckless endangerment of people, as well as obviously unreasonableness associated with that. And he also didn't take steps to avoid the danger. So basically, those charges all emanate from the Firearms Control Act, and particularly Section 120. If you look at Section 123B and C, and you look at Section 120.10, you'll see that's where most of those charges emanate from. So basically, he was charged with using and possessing a firearm unlawfully. It wasn't for a lawful reason. Rian, for instance, if you and I together and someone tries to hijack us and they're armed, and I happen to have 1 or 2 firearms on me, and I say, Rian, here's my firearm, use my firearm to protect our lives. That's a different situation. That's in self-defense. The firearm is under my control still. You're with me when it happens, or particularly on a shooting range. If you and I are shooting together and you don't possess a firearm, in terms of Section 22, I can lend you my firearm or let you use my firearm under my direct control and supervision at the shooting range. This clearly wasn't those circumstances. And this clearly also wasn't by accident, that this firearm was discharged. Things can happen by accident. You can have a negligent discharge, but this never wasn't those circumstances. You can see the intent was to take that firearm and shoot it above the heads of the crowd. And the problem for Mr. Malema is that when you use a semi-automatic firearm, in this case, a semi-automatic rifle, you're looking at a 15-year jail term, potentially. Aside from the other charges, the contraventions of the Firearms Control Act that deal with, 5 years for this and 5 years for that. Of course, all these things can run concurrently. And the other problem we probably also had, he did a bare denial defense and said this wasn't a firearm, this was a toy gun, this was a blank firing weapon. And he didn't give any sort of mitigating circumstances. For instance, it happened by accident or something like that. So when they deal with the sentencing in January, the 23rd of January, the magistrate is going to have to look at all these facts and circumstances, and they're going to have to deal with whether there were any mitigating circumstances to get lesser charges. The other problem with Ms. Malema has is that if he receives a jail time more than 12 months, he cannot stand for Parliament anymore. There's obviously sections in terms of Parliamentary Act where you would have to step down as a parliamentarian. Of course, he has said he's going to appeal. So we are going to be looking at a potentially lengthy road with leave to appeal to the High Court or leave to appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeal. He's mentioned that it's going to take all the Constitutional Court. So we probably are looking at a fairly lengthy road before he physically potentially does any sort of jail time. So that's the crux of where we are with the Malema case, Riaan.
There's one thing that I just wanted to touch on, as I mentioned to you before we started the recording, is I've seen a lot of people commenting on this, saying that well, there's various causes which have got nothing to do with the actual legal applications when it comes to this. So there seems to be a lot of uninformed opinions floating around as to why this guilty verdict was arrived at. What exactly does South African law state when it comes to this? Just to clear this up.
Well, I mean, as I sort of briefly dealt with in the beginning, I mean, you can't just discharge a firearm in a built-up area of public place. You know, if you're hunting with friends or family or something like that, that's different, you know, or if you had a shooting range. So there's no good reason. So if I just deal with the first thing, you know, unlawful possession of a firearm, you know, he possessed the firearm without a license. He used the firearm without a license. And then what always follows with the conviction of, if you find an unlawful possession of the firearm, is the ammunition as well, because ammunition was discharged from the firearm. But I think obviously the thing that that everyone can see quite clearly is that this was definitely in a built-up area or public place, and the law is clear for everyone out there that you may not just discharge a firearm. You can't just shoot any firearm just because you want to, because it can result in reckless endangerment of the general public at large. You know, bullets have to stop somewhere, and potentially, even though he was pointing the barrel up in the air, potentially any of those bullets could have fallen anywhere or hit anyone within the stadium. So the law has always been quite clear about that. You may not discharge a firearm. In fact, this was even in terms of the previous act as well. There were provisions in the previous act, that the 1969 Act, that also would have covered a similar, you know, circumstance. But clearly, in terms of the Firearms Control Act of 2000, it's there to ensure that people don't discharge firearms in a built-up area. And in actual fact, if you go back to the SAGA regulations that they wanted to push through in March, they somehow wanted to introduce more legislation, specifically dealt with discharging a firearm in a cemetery. You don't need to create more legislation, is what we were saying at the time. Section 120 already has these provisions in them. It's already in the Act, that there is a law, and it's quite clearly that if you break the law, it doesn't matter who you are, what position you are in society or government or parliament, that the law should hold you to book. As law-abiding citizens, we need to follow the law, and ignorance of the law in this case is no excuse. You know, you can't excuse the fact, because any reasonable person, Riaan, yourself and myself included, if we just suddenly went outside our doors here and started just discharging firearms willy-nilly into the square behind me, clearly I should understand that I'm going to be potentially hitting someone, you know, with those bullets. So I think the law has been dealt with quite fairly here. I think the magistrate was at great lengths to explain in detail and in depth why she came to her decision. And, you know, as we all know, it took basically almost 3 days for that judgment to be read. She didn't have to do that. You know, quite often when magistrates or judges hand matters down, they will give you the outcome and they'll say you have been convicted of these offences, or this is my judgment, and then they provide a written judgment. But it seems like the magistrate went at more lengths to ensure that she was extremely fair. And I think she dealt with the matter. Look, no judgment's perfect. No magistrate or judge is perfect. But I think she went to great lengths to try and explain the rationale and reason behind her decision. Obviously, lawyers will look at that judgment and decide whether there are technical reasons to take her judgment on. Ms. Malema has mentioned constitutional issues. You know, he's mentioned why was accused number two not convicted, where he was convicted. So the person that handed him the firearm wasn't convicted of anything. So those are technical issues that may well be dealt with down the line in his appeal, you know, when it gets dealt with.
Yeah, he can and will obviously exercise his right to take this on appeal. So we will all be watching with great interest to see where this ends up.
Yes.
Certainly a bit of a landmark case, I think, because he is such a well-known political figure. Damian, thank you for that. Let's move on to our old friend, the Firearms Control Act and those amendments. Yes. The last time you and I spoke, we discussed the fact that there seemed to be more changes to this on the table, handled behind closed doors by NEDLAC. You have since come to more knowledge, and there's a lot more going on now. So maybe just enlighten us on where we stand at this moment.
Yeah, look, obviously at this point, we still don't have sight of the actual entire bill, but the Honourable Mr. Ian Cameron, who's the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Police, asked a number of questions of the Minister concerning the FCA bill, and the response was that it appears from the Minister's response that we're looking at exactly the same bill that we saw in May 2021. And as you may recall, Rian, that bill was very draconian. It took away the right to choose to own a firearm for self-defense. It removed the right of collectors to own firearms for collecting, obviously restricted sport shooting, hunting firearms, restricted business licenses, restricted security companies. So if it's exactly the same bill that we saw in May 2021, all the bilateral discussions that we had with Civilian Secretary for Police, all those discussions that we had with the police and various government entities, including CERA, seems to have not been absorbed or taken account of, if this is the case. And again, I said we don't really know because we haven't had sight of the bill. So either the Minister is completely wrong and he doesn't, you know, he's got the whole factual circumstances wrong, but which I find it hard to believe. Surely he would have just made a couple of phone calls, a couple of emails to the Civilian Secretary and said, listen, I've got these questions from Mr. Ian Cameron, you know, please advise. So if he's saying that the bill is pretty much in its same format, surely that must be factually correct then, which is extremely surprising considering that there was a huge outcry from the general civilian populace about the removal of self-defense. You know, I was at that time being interviewed across the whole of South Africa, and I can tell you the people in the townships were not interested in handing their firearms in. And as you may recall, there was 119,000 objections. You know, we objected to it. Just about every single stakeholder or organization out there put serious factual objections. And I can tell you from SAGA's perspective, our objections was purely factual, unemotional, and we gave counter argument against every single aspect of the bill. I mean, reloading, for instance. I mean, you know, there are some calibers and types of ammunition out there that one cannot shoot without being able to reload. So the removal of reloading is just, you know, another sort of issue that is ludicrous and just doesn't make sense. But there were many aspects of that May 2021 bill that just didn't make sense at all. And it looks like they'd been drafted in a complete vacuum without rationality, without considering that South Africa is at a high crime rate. In fact, we probably have a higher crime rate than we had, you know, 4 years ago.
Yes.
You know, things have gotten worse in the police force and the state compared to what it was 4 years ago, 10 years ago.
why would they, if this is the case, and I mean, it certainly seems to be the case, I don't think there's any specific reason to doubt the minister on that. Why would they just run with the same thing? I mean, it never went any further than that in 2021. And now all of a sudden, do you think it's somebody who is trying to find something to make himself look busy with? Is there a more sinister drive behind this? I mean, the fact is that they would like to see the civilian population disarmed. That's never been a secret.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, yeah, the ANC have never been, they've been quite clear about it. It's been always policy that they don't want to see you and I and civilians and law-abiding citizens possessing firearms at all. So the rationale behind it is that's their policy. And number two, I think as I intimated in the last interview, I think there seems to be some concerns from government that you and I as law-abiding citizens will just go ahead and break the law and have some sort of weird situation of trying to overthrow. Let's just call it what it is: overthrow the government, which is never going to be the case.
Yes.
And there seems to be major concerns about private security, and the fact that private security obviously possess a number of firearms and many thousands of firearms, all of which are ludicrous. In a rational society, a rational government, they should never enter into their minds that you and I are going to take up arms against anything or anyone. Obviously, what happened in July 2021 was the fact that civilians stood up for one another, and it was across the board. The July 2021 riots in KZN, that gave a shock to the entire country, to its foundation, that we could see that we could not rely on the police, on the army, etc., and that the private citizens across the board, whether you were a taxi driver, tow truck driver, no matter what you did, all of them banded together to protect their neighborhoods, in KZN at the time. And if government is afraid of that, that is a strange thing to be afraid of, because the law-abiding citizens were protecting one another and protecting the police stations, from being looted and attacked, which is saying. So in actual fact, we were assisting government by protecting infrastructure, key places. There's no ways that we were going to be part of the problem and trying to overthrow the government. So I'm surmising here. I'm really just guessing, grasping at straws.
Sure.
Unless I can be in front of the entire cabinet tomorrow and speak to the entire cabinet, the ANC part of the cabinet, and Ramaphosa himself, and find out exactly why this is coming through. I'm just guessing and surmising here why there would be irrationality about pushing the same bill through again. But again, I just want to reiterate that the problem is we haven't seen this bill. Although we've requested the bill, we haven't seen it to verify this, to verify factually that it is exactly the same bill that we saw in May 2021, which does not make any sense to me at all. Because
I wonder if they're delaying it now because they've realized that the pressure from the firearms community side and the general population is increasing. People are increasingly getting agitated about this. As in, why are you so intent on trying to remove our rights to defend ourselves, especially in a country where you clearly cannot control the criminality that's going on, and we are sort of left to our own devices. I mean, that's why we've got this unbelievably big security industry going and growing in this country, because there is a distinct lack from government side to be able to provide that service. And so, I suppose we'll see. If they come out with it, if they don't just decide, okay, let's just shelve it for another couple of years and try again, see if we can catch them unawares. We can but hope. But other than that, we wait and see what they come up with.
I think, Rian, again, the government seems to underestimate civilian society. That when there's an irrational piece of legislation or something that just doesn't make any sense, it's again, I think we're dealing with people in ivory towers. You got people that are sitting right at the top of the whole structure of things, and they have security every single day of their life. They're relying on the state to protect them. Billions of rand are spent on them protecting them. So it's I don't think they have any idea what the people go through at a grassroots level or township level, the amount of crime, because they don't feel it. They will not feel that crime. If you and I know what happens, you and I are affected somewhat by crime, and more so the people in the townships and poorer areas and that, who have nothing but themselves to protect themselves and can't rely on the police. So it's a government that's out of touch really with what's happening at the grassroots level. And I think they're so disconnected from civilian society these days that they have no idea. Because I can promise you, the guys in the townships, the lawful gun owners in townships and everywhere in the country are not going to hand in their firearms. They're not going to not apply for a firearm for self-defense in these circumstances. It's again, I think, government underestimating civilian society, and that we've become very good at mobilizing very quickly within lawful means and using our lawful rights. And we have, I think, progressive democracy in some respects, in that in the early days, I think civilians were not as vocal, or the private citizens were not as vocal as they were 30 years ago, for instance. It was a new democracy. Now I think we're very vocal, and we will come to the fore more quickly when we see our rights are going to be trodden on. And I think that's the change that's happened in the last 10 years. I can see it myself personally in the last 10 years, that if we put something out, it gets out there far quicker. It might be because of technology, it might be because of influences like you and your YouTube channel, Rian. But I think today, civilian society is far more connected, and if an issue comes to the fore that affects all of us, and this does affect all of us, even if you don't even want to own a firearm, if your private security no longer has firearms, you're going to be in trouble, because of the rampant crime. So I think that's the change. And the underestimation of government is that civilian society can mobilize and can, use their rights, vocal rights, to change things.
Damian, one would have thought that the government would remember the whole tollgate saga. Oh, you see what I just did there? The tollgate saga.
Yes.
Well, you would think that they would remember that. I mean, we made that go away. It took a long time, but we made it go away. So that you would imagine that they should have by now realized that if civilian society gets their backs up, they are very serious about it. And this is one issue that people are extremely serious about, because literally our personal safety and that of our loved ones is at stake.
Yes.
Well, Damian, I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rian. Thanks for coming again.
Keep us updated for the viewers and the listeners. As always, like the video, subscribe to the channel, smash that bell icon so you can get notifications of all our new videos coming out, including this one. And this will also be available on the podcast on Spotify called Quick Shot. So keep an eye out for it there. If you are interested in any of the loan operator courses, as always, there is a link in the description below the video. Check it out. We look forward to seeing you on a range one of these days. And I'll be displaying the SAGA details on screen for the duration of the video as well. So do check it out and chat to Damian and them. Damian, thanks. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Pleasure, Rian. As always, thank you very much. And you on your side as well, have a great weekend.